think we can all begin to admit that Checo's season so far has been pretty good. But is it 3 years good?
I mean, of course, it depends on how good the other Red Bull drivers are, but as far as I'm concerned, Checo's initial offer of a 3-year deal is quite ballsy. As ballsy as me buying this for my kid. And also for me.
Even though Sergio hasn't won any races so far this year, and he has less points than this time last year as well, the overall impression that we're getting from his performances is that it seems to be a bit better. That there's a far less desperate attitude regarding qualifying and him being able to really qualify well this time, and therefore it makes his lot on Sunday far less arduous, and thusly he is able to get the goods and provide some results that are going to mainly keep Red Bull from chucking him on the scrap heap. And it's all down to, in my honest opinion, Sergio no longer looking to Max and going, I'll have him, I will. Instead of going for the world title, he would rather just try and compare himself to Max. If he is relatively competitive amongst one of the greatest drivers of this generation, then that's pretty good. I mean, okay, he's driving the same car as Max, debatably, but, you know, a lot of other drivers could be in that similar situation as well. So as far as I'm concerned, this is one of Sergio's best seasons. Checo's doing what he's supposed to be doing as a partner to Max and racing for Red Bull, and that means picking up as many points as possible and securing both titles for the team. And even though last year was quite shaky for him, he was able to do it, even though Lewis did give him quite a hard time toward the very end. So naturally, in the wake of his opening gambit, which seems to be quite chilled in comparison to previous seasons, as well as the obvious struggles of Daniel Ricciardo when he's trying to outdo his teammate at Racing Bulls, you would think that maybe Checo is quite punchy, that the ball would be in his court. He would be able to dictate the pace and the length of his contract extension, and that he would even be getting one. As well as Red Bull supposedly balking at the idea that Audi would be paying that much money for Carlos Sainz, and therefore they would not be inclined to do so, which makes the lot for Checo even better. So Perez would be feeling quite buoyant, so his opening statement in terms of contract negotiations, at least according to Helmut Marko, is, how about 3 years? 3 years? 3. You're talking about 1, 2, 3? That takes you through to 2027. That's a lot. I mean, that's a very confident pitch there, Checo. By the end of that season, Checo would be approaching 38 years old, and whilst age is becoming less and less of an issue these days, and he is younger than Daniel Ricciardo, who could replace him, or at least could have replaced him based on what Christian Horner's been saying, but that's a statement in of itself, that would be really going against the party line that Red Bull's really stuck to for the longest time, in investing in younger drivers, because by the time we get to that season as well, Max Verstappen himself would be approaching 30 years old. And admittedly, 30 is still well within your prime in regards to Formula 1, but this would effectively be the oldest lineup that Red Bull would have ever had, and that would therefore be really counterintuitive to its up until recently robust junior driver program. And yes, I know that Mark Webber and David Coulthard, they weren't exactly spring chickens themselves, but they weren't around for long, and they did provide some really good efforts in terms of getting points and establishing them as a team in of itself, with of course David Coulthard's initial podium at Monaco, where he basically looked like a really decent version of Superman. But the recent trend now has been always to at least have one younger driver who could then lead the charge going forward, and the cycle would repeat. With Checo wanting to be there for even longer, that would sort of go against that trend. But then again, Checo sort of went against that trend anyway, because, you know, he was in his 30s when, you know, he replaced Albon. But yeah, 2027, that's a notable shift in the team dynamic, and it's also kind of impractical given the rest of the drivers who compete within that team. As Marko pointed out, the team isn't in a position to finalize everything, and that things will be coming to a head relatively soon, and that it probably won't lead to a 3-year deal, he said. First, he wanted a 3-year contract, but we will find a solution, according to Racing News 365. That indicates to me that we will definitely not be seeing Sergio Perez through to that season, at least not right now, barring another extension, that it probably might be, at best, 2 years, or more likely, as far as my own opinion really goes, it might be 1 year, and then maybe rolling contracts afterwards, mirroring what happened with Bottas at Mercedes. But that doesn't mean I think he won't get an extension at all, because if he just keeps doing what he's been doing up until now, then Red Bull might not see any need to change the status quo. What's been working? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and all that stuff. 3 years though, my goodness. I mean, does he deserve it? Does he even deserve a contract extension at all? Well, I mean, he certainly seems to believe that he does, otherwise he wouldn't have mentioned it right at the beginning. It could have easily been a joke, but I don't think Checo would be joking with his future, especially racing for a team that currently is one of the best in F1's history. But to be fair, the language from both the special advisor and the team principal has been a lot more glowing than it has been in recent months, that really, it's now Checo's seat to lose rather than Daniel's seat to lose. That's a clear change in what they are really thinking. Checo's now got to do the business, whereas Daniel, well, he's got to hope for a miracle at this point. And also, Horner said that there's no particular rush to snap anybody up, be it Checo or otherwise. He does admit that Checo probably would like to shout from the rooftops tomorrow if he could, and yeah, before that was well. Christian Horner is now starting to get off that high horse of his, that he would have Daniel Ricciardo in that second seat come hell or high water. That maybe now he is warming up to the idea of Sergio Perez staying at Red Bull for just that little bit longer. I mean, of course, Daniel could spring some surprises later on in the season. He could suddenly get really, really good, completely outshine Yuki Tsunoda, and then there would be justification to put Daniel in the car for at least 1 year and see whether or not he has or has not lost his mojo. And therefore, when they go to 2026, if he has lost that mojo, then they could just promote Lawson or go with somebody else. If Daniel can secure 6th place for Racing Bulls, their best result since 2021, then I think tongues will start wagging between them again, as well as considering drivers from outside Red Bull in of itself, because remember, Horner was the one that referred to Carlos Sainz as unemployed, and really sparked debate about whether or not he would even join Red Bull or even consider returning to that fold. In the wake of his Australian Grand Prix victory and continuing the trend of being the only non-blue racer to win a race in F1 since George Russell back in 2022. But then again, Ferrari's rumoured to be racing in blue for Miami, perhaps a callback to their rebellious livery regarding a spat with Enzo Ferrari, and the FIA regarding his 250 LM sports cars of the time. Instead of just keeping the cars at home, he just kept the red paint at home. But it did result in a really nice looking livery, and I can't wait to see that in action. It's going to be really lovely.
It's got a tough act to follow in the form of the Monza 2023 livery, in my opinion.
The indifference from Horner as to the second Red Bull seat right now is a huge leap forward for Sergio, even though it may not look it at first glance. Because just a few short months ago, everyone was thinking, well, that was it for Checo, that he'd done all he could, and even though he had got second place for that team, that still wouldn't be enough, and that Daniel Ricciardo would be swooped in immediately, even though Checo still had 1 year left on his contract, and that would be that. Checo limped over the finishing line in second place, but we do have to remember still that throughout all of that, even though Lewis Hamilton fought him right until the end, he was able to secure something that no other Red Bull second driver could: a clean sweep, the 1-2-1. That is something that Christian Horner has been craving for a long time. And even though Checo did make a hash of it toward the middle of the season and the end of the season, he was still able to do it. And therefore, that's going to count a lot in terms of his future with that team. Mark Webber couldn't do it, Daniel Ricciardo couldn't do it, and yet Checo could. You might be thinking, well, Valtteri was a better teammate, but need I remind you that it took Bottas a little while to get fully up to speed with that Mercedes, and remember, 2018 was effectively his annus horribilis, because he was 5th in a very dominant car. But then come the 3rd season of his career, he was able to do the deed with Mercedes and get the 1-2-1 clean sweep for the first time in his tenure at Mercedes, much like Checo did in his 3rd season as well. It takes time to bed yourself in and reach your full potential with that squad, and right now, Checo is looking odds on to get the clean sweep for Red Bull again, like Bottas did in 2020. Also, I don't know whether it counts for anything these days, but Sergio Perez is the longest serving teammate of Max Verstappen in the Dutchman's entire career, certainly in Formula 1. I mean, that's got to count for something. Staying power Checo has. And Marco does seem to rate that as well, that he said, oh, you should take crumb and comfort, Sergio. You survived the longest. Yeah, survived. That's one word for it, yeah. At the very least, he's come away with some victories for Red Bull, at least. He's at least been able to add to his tally. But the question remains, does that goodwill and that good fortune and the talents he's shown thus far deserve a seat at the top table through to 2027? Well, no, honestly. Granted, he's managed to find the correct attitude and handling working alongside Verstappen, but can he sustain that for 3 years and not fall off or give in to temptation and go for the world title again? I mean, it depends. Because maybe why he decided to go for a 3-year deal initially is because he is seeing something in the wind tunnels and in the simulator about the Red Bull 2026 car that might appeal to him. that he might be trying to convince the Red Bull bods that, hey, I might be really good with these cars. This type of car, these rules might appeal to me, whereas it might not appeal so much to Verstappen, my teammate. I might be able to get one up on him. I might be even closer. We might be even more dominant together. So why don't you consider a long-term deal so I can settle in and really get the most out of this car? That might be what he'd been saying behind closed doors. I mean, this is all pontification and conjecture on my part, speculation. But there must be something to it to want to stay with that team for that long, because, of course, he might want to consider options elsewhere, because other teams might be really good as well. But he's sticking at Red Bull, so that's got to mean something. Also, I'm thinking this is because Max has been very, very vocal with his dissatisfaction of the 2026 rules, and, of course, he likes to be in Formula 1 to have fun. And if he's not having fun driving those cars, if the RB 2022 turns out to be a handful, and it sparks no joy in him driving it, then he could easily just walk away and say, you know what, I don't like these cars, I'm done, bye. I mean, that's the only way he would break his contract earlier. Sorry, Toto. Perhaps Sergio has been more versatile with these cars and he's feeling frisky and wanting to maximize that potential. And that's totally fair, because throughout the entire history of Formula 1, drivers have had particular preferences when it comes to eras of cars. I think Lewis Hamilton is a really good example of this, the turbo hybrid era beginning 2014 through 2020. Those cars really appeal to the style of Lewis Hamilton, whereas now the ground effect cars of this era, they just don't. Sure, he's had moments of performance and splendid work throughout an entire race, but they've been relatively fleeting, nowhere near as solid and as consistent as they were just a few years ago before the 2022 rules came in. But this might be all speculation and hope on Checo's part. He might be good in the simulator, but when it comes to on the track, and whether or not Max Verstappen may actually be really good with it after all, he may enjoy it, that could throw all of his plans off kilter. It might derail them. And also, another reason why I don't think he's going to get that contract, he'd be lucky to even get one, is something that he doesn't have that Bottas did have. A teammate that cares about whether he's there or not. To be fair, Max Verstappen wasn't totally dismissive of this situation, because he would find racing with Fernando Alonso strange when all of those rumours were going about, but put simply, Max doesn't really care who is driving alongside him in the same car. That he believes in himself to do the job without needing somebody else to back him up, and that he is the boss of everyone. Yeah, okay, that might be a little bit arrogant on your part, Max, but I do get what you're trying to say. He simply feels in control at that team, that he doesn't have to worry about needing a teammate to back him up in certain situations. Only the team worries about that. Max can just go sailing off into the sunset and just race his own race, like we saw in China. He got bored, so he decided to drift it into the final corner. He was in control, he had fun, even though he probably gave the pit wall a bit of a fright, because as we saw with Alonso and Carlos Sainz, in that gravel at China, you could easily have things undone. If he got cocky and he did spin it out and crash the car and retired, he would have never heard the last of it, no matter how many championships he would have had. So Checo can't really rely on Max to fight his corner. If it comes to contracts, Max is not going to be saying, yeah, keep Checo, I like him, he's doing really good, don't change it. Whereas Lewis and Valtteri, they had that connection. Hamilton always commenting on how Bottas was his favourite ever teammate and that he wouldn't want to change him. Yeah, that it worked as it was, and why would you break it because it was getting results? Even though Valtteri was constantly on a one-year contract, he was constantly the wingman, even though he would have his moments when he would grow a beard and eat some more porridge and have an espresso where he was trying to show some of his character. But as we've seen at Alfa Romeo and Sauber, that's clearly something that was very much tempered. We've not really seen the full Valtteri until just a couple of years ago. But either way, the dynamic was there. Lewis had Valtteri's back. And when you've got somebody like Lewis Hamilton supporting you and keeping you there and really saying how good you are, then that's got to count for something. And Checo doesn't have that. So it's really all down to him to secure his job and convince Christian Horner and Helmut Marko that he's worth keeping around and that his results are enough to fend off the likes of Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, Liam Lawson even. And that's even its own kettle of fish because there's a battle going on at Racing Bulls right now where Liam Lawson is a constant presence. And whenever there's a camera in the Racing Bulls garage, they are guaranteed to find Liam Lawson. And when either Yuki or Daniel make a mistake, they'll cut to Liam and see what his reaction is. They're not even hiding it now. As far as I'm concerned, though, Checo does deserve a contract extension of some kind, or at the very least, being able to see out the remainder of his contract, and then things can go from there. He got the clean sweep. He's looking odds on to being able to do it again in an even quicker fashion. If Red Bull can seal the deal much sooner, then I think that's pretty much it for Checo. He's guaranteed to be there for 2025. I know what you're probably going to say, that Miami, up until then, he was looking really good, even to being a contender for the world title. But then Max Verstappen came out all guns blazing, completely decimated him from much lower down the grid, and then it completely fell apart from Checo from there because he was expecting to go for the title, and then it looked like, yeah, right, mate, and then he just completely folded. This time, though, it's different. Checo's not looking for the title right now. If he is going to look for the title, then it might come later on in the season. And even if it doesn't, he's not that bothered about it anymore. He just wants to be close enough to Max Verstappen to at least be seen as a pretty good driver in his own right. It's so much less pressure. You can just race your own race, and so long as you get second or third and you qualify well, then that's all that Red Bull really need to ask you to do. But in terms of that contract length, I really don't see 3 years or even 2 years as being an option. Right now, as far as I'm concerned, based on what's going on at Racing Bulls and the driver market there, I think Checo is probably going to be seeing a Valtteri situation where he's going to be getting a 1-year contract, and that being the case going forward. They will be assessing him every single season until they deem either he's not good enough anymore, or Liam Lawson, or Ricciardo, or Tsunoda, or whoever else is better, or somebody outside of the Red Bull wheelhouse becomes available and is too tantalizing to ignore, and at least in the eyes of Marco, not too expensive, then they might replace him instead. He's living on borrowed time, but I feel like he does deserve that borrowed time. As in, I don't want him to leave Formula One right now, Checo. He's doing the business. So long as he can just continue this good form, where so far he's not fallen outside the top 5 in terms of results, and it might have even been the top 3, had damage to his floor not impeded his progression in Melbourne. You've just got to look at the entire situation, that even though we've had a lot of discontent regarding the future of some of the upper management at Red Bull, Checo has been sitting pretty. Max has been incredibly irked by all of the drama that's been going on about Marco and Horner's future with the team. He's been right in the center of it, whereas Checo has been completely isolated from it. He's just been doing his own thing. The only happy person at Red Bull for the last few months has been consistently Sergio, because he's not involved in any of that. He's just doing his own thing. He's racing his own race, and he could prepare for that season without any worry whatsoever, which is why he's looked so composed. He looks really at home. It's taking them a while, but he's looking at home now, and therefore he would feel quite bullish that maybe he does have the advantage, that he seems quite rock solid, and all of the other Racing Bull competitors are not looking so. Daniel's not looking in his best condition. Yuki probably doesn't have a future with Red Bull, considering how dismissive Horner has been. And Liam Lawson needs to do his initial stint at Racing Bull before he could even be considered for the top job. And also, if Max Verstappen does leave, Checo wants to be there when that happens. If Max does leave early, and then therefore Checo is there, he will be that constant. He will be then becoming the team leader to then guide a brand new driver going forward for at least a year or two, before he can then retire as the de facto Red Bull leader, the one after Verstappen, and he can hold his head high. That's what maybe he's trying to do as well. Maybe he knows that Max might not be here for long. He just wants to wait it out as much as he can when time allows him to do so. But I just feel like he's in a much safer place than he used to be. But 3 years, that is a really, really bold statement, Checo. I appreciate it and I respect it, but I really don't see that you go from being barely able to survive a season to then wanting to stay for a few more years. That's a big leap for any driver. So, yeah, it's looking okay. It's certainly looking a lot better than it is for Valtteri Bottas right now, whose future in Formula One looks really, really precarious, even though he seems to be in complete denial, because Audi might have other ideas. As I mentioned, they want to pay for Carlos Sainz, and pay a lot. And sadly for Valtteri, Lewis isn't there to back him up, which is what I talk more about in this video. You can go and watch right now, as that he's got to really do the best he can to convince Audi that he's worth keeping. But Sauber's pit stops and reliability aren't helping.
With address.